feeding on my tension. My countrymen, they love their fiction. Words upon now, it's made with good intentions.
Welcome to 10200, the Independent Politics and Media podcast. We're back for another current events. On the weekend, you maybe caught our midweek episode where we released the audio of the system change meeting, talking about the potential or the need for a radical left party. If you haven't heard that yet, it's one episode down or up, depending on your podcast app. Go and have a listen. It's a really good little episode with Sue Bradford and Elliot Crossan from System Change. I'm joined today by my co-host, Stephanie Rogers. How are you doing, Stephanie?
Kia ora. Not doing too badly in the context of the overwhelming nightmare of our lives.
Hey, wow. Fantastic to hear.
Just want to get the pod off to a good start.
Look, if we can start like this and just keep ascending from here, we're looking good. We're also joined by special guest Bevan Holloway. How are you doing, Bevan?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good. Thank you for asking. It's nice that someone's interested. It kind of mirror Stephanie's comment there, right? There's a bit of nightmare surrounding us. So it's nice to find some solace in some small spaces.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you for inviting me on.
Really glad to have you here. For those who haven't been following, I guess, education news on social media, and for those of you who have, Bevan, you've recently been looking into the curriculum review that's occurring and the way in which that has been undertaken by a range of different actors, and we'll kind of get into the details of that. You've released a couple of bigger, well, I mean, I guess we call them articles or discussions about this on Blue Sky. There have been people sharing this on social media, on Twitter as well. And so some of you will be aware of what's happening here. But before we kick right into that, Bevan, do you just want to introduce yourselves to our audience so they know where you're coming from on this?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a teacher. I have been teaching for a long time, held a number of different positions, all in the English learning area. So I guess that's my first area of interest in this broader discussion around curriculum change. Previously been head of department in a big secondary school in Wellington, was a recipient of fellowship that I use to explore what happens when you take play pedagogy into a secondary school, particularly English. The research I did in that was featured by NZCER, New Zealand Council for Educational Research, when they were highlighting the possibilities that COVID brought to, ways to rethink about education. Worked in the professional learning space since 2019, but have recently, sort of back end of term one this year, returned to the classroom part-time as an English teacher. And yes, I guess in terms of my perspective is there's probably two things going on there. Like very aware of the kind of broader machinations, so we call them, that have been lurking in the background for probably the best part of a decade or so, really overtly, often driven by, the right-wing New Zealand initiative that I think have been really effective in shaping how the general public in particular think about education. They've been very effective in creating a narrative that describes a good school, that describes what learning is and what it's for. And I don't think there's been a very effective sort of counter to that at all. And so that's something I'm sort of interested in. I started my career at Wellington College as a teacher, so I'm very familiar with that very highly focused, outcomes-driven approach to education. I was really fortunate to have a colleague there, Dr. Martin Reynolds, who is, well, I think he's a giant in the Pacific education field, but I was part of his PhD research, and that really changed the shape of my career in terms of thinking about what learning is, what the importance of relationships with learners, and how that can really be the lever that leads to those profound shifts in both engagement, imagination, curiosity, and outcomes that come from that. So that's kind of my perspective. I think when NZATE dropped these documents that were the result of their OIA request, my nose was already in the air a little bit, shall we say, and so I kind of pounced on them. So that's kind of where I've come from with what I've actually ended up producing.
Cheers for that, Bevan. So those, I guess, who haven't been following, and we have mentioned it, like you said, Bevan, some of this has been happening for about a decade, with the way that the New Zealand Initiative in particular, but a range of other experts, air quotes, and commentators have been framing up education. And even on this particular issue, we were talking about it earlier in the year on our current events episodes, and trying to warn about the risks once the curriculum review and the advisory group, people had some very familiar names on them. One of those is, and I guess one of the key ones, is Michael Johnston from the New Zealand Initiative, who is probably not just the main right-wing thinker who writes about education, but probably one of the most platformed of any person in New Zealand in this space. And that's across almost every major outlet. And then I think particularly for longer pieces, regularly gets a spot in Newsroom over the last few years to say some pretty outrageous things, in my opinion, about what he kind of refers to as science of learning, education theory, and how that should inform both how the curriculum is structured, but also how schools are structured, and how everything should be drawn together. And so as soon as these names, and another one is Elizabeth Rata, who I'm not going to get into the history of everything awful she's been involved with, as you say, kind of warning bells started going off. The New Zealand Association of English Teachers kind of put in an OIA about this, as you said, to find out, I guess, broadly how the advisory group was structured and how they're doing the curriculum review. And I was shocked to see some of the information that ended up coming out of that. And I'm just glad that there are still like some accountability functions and processes that still work, because particularly some of the discussions that were being had via email by ministry staff, absolutely eye-opening. Like, there's a very clear sense that people inside the room know that something is not being done correctly. Are you able to give us, Bevan, a kind of short chronology of exactly what is happening here? I encourage everyone to go and read the documents and to read Bevan's piece, and we'll link it in the summary as well. But yeah, just for the audio format.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing to really note, like what Erica Stanford's been really good at since she took office, is talk about the need for change. And she's almost captured that word, right? Things need to change. It's really important that people are aware that change was already underway. There was a huge curriculum refresh process that started in 2019 that drew on a huge, diverse range of experts across Aotearoa New Zealand, from New Zealand Council for Educational Research to our universities with the curriculum experts in there, to teachers, to people that had interests in education, sector leaders, consultants. If you go and read one of the briefing papers, it actually lists all the people that had been involved in the process to date. And it's exhaustive. And that process had been slow because it was doing exactly what you'd expect to happen for something this important, which is a curriculum refresh or change, shall we call it, which was to take its time, to consult widely, to seek the input from those that were going to make it real on the ground, so teachers in the classroom. And so that it annoys me a little bit that word change is now just being tagged solely to what has happened with the Ministerial Advisory Group under Erica Stanford's watch. So that grates me a little bit. And the ministry in those initial stages with Stanford taking office it's really clear in the documents that they are keen to stress that that's the case. I think one of the things they say is, I know that you're keen to rebalance the, local autonomy versus national direction, and please be aware that process has been underway already. We're already thinking about that, and perhaps the balance hasn't been right to date. So they're really stressing who's been involved in the process to date. They are aware that she wants to appoint a expert group, they call it, and they're very keen to define what's out of scope. And one of the things that's out of scope is to rewrite the English and maths curriculum, which never happens. So it's really just interesting in the lead up to the appointment of that Ministerial Advisory Group. It's really interesting to see the ministry advocating to effectively position what the national policy was, which they called teaching the basics brilliantly. They're trying to position that within the program of work that's already happened, and they fail. It's When you see the makeup of the Ministerial Advisory Group, there's 12 of them. Very few of that 12 were part of who the ministry recommended. Person who the ministry recommended as chairing the group, I think for very valid reasons. The experience in that context before. They're very skilled at chairing groups that in curriculum areas that bring diverse views together. They don't even make the final group at all. And so that had my head going. And then when I saw the final list, from being around education for a while and seeing some of those names, when I did the count, 8 of the 12 had very strong links to Michael Johnston. And that immediately just makes you think, okay, this isn't really, ministerial advisory groups aren't necessarily supposed to be diverse. Their intent is to bring some specialist knowledge to bear on a particular area. But this feels like a clique or a sect that are being appointed for a particular purpose. That really, I guess the word upset me, right, when I saw that. When I was reading through the documentations, and really, like you said, the emails are very interesting. There was one that's really telling. It's around mid-February when Michael Johnston emails, I think it's Anya Pollock at the ministry, asking effectively, if we write the curriculum, do we have to go through a procurement process? And that's where you see the first real evidence of senior ministry officials effectively, really strongly trying to push back at what has obviously been happening through conversations that aren't documented, etc. Right? There's definitely an awareness there. And she basically tells him to stop, get back to giving advice. The work of creating curriculum is the work of government. And when you go and read the public service guidelines around ministerial advisory groups, they're very explicit in saying that the creation of regulations, which is what a curriculum is for schools, is the work of government. It's not the work of these particular groups. They're unsuited to them.
Advisory has a meaning, right?
Yeah. The clue's in the title, right? And also, like the service guidelines, they also say it's on something particular and specific, but you look at the terms through which this group has been given, it's wide-ranging and sweeping. The ministry only manages to get 2 things out of scope, which I can only guess were the things that this group weren't really interested in. Only one of them has anything to do with the curriculum. The other one is how the curriculum will be, supported, which is through resources. It just blew my mind, really, what was going on. And just to see the machinations of that conversation around, no, get back in your lane. This is not your work. It was really fascinating to see play out through those emails. And I thought their solution to it was elegant, if not disingenuous at the same time, right? So there's obviously been thought and conversations happening on a back channel somewhere. But when they released their report, I was really confused as to why, mid-March, Michael Johnston's emailing the group saying, right, let's put our groups together. We're going to do this and that. I need names. And I'm thinking, but you've just been told you can't do this. Why are you so confident? But then I read the report that was released a few days later. And in their report, they recommend that they do the writing of the curriculum. And for the minister to sign off on that, so she agrees to it in early April, it blows my mind. And for me, that's the biggest story here. Regardless of what you think of the pedagogical approach that they are advocating for, that's the biggest story, right? How they've managed to subvert democratic principles and co-opt the powers of the ministry to do the work that they want done. It's like a perfect template for other special interest groups to do the same. And we should all care about that.
Yeah, it's really worrying in particular, as you say, where the ministry tries to do something. They understand what is happening. They understand that the advisory group is trying to go around them and just fail to stop them. And the way it gets signed off by the minister, and also the way that the minister has been speaking about it in public, you described the group as almost like a sect. And you're just like, well, she's probably part of that same group ideologically. Stephanie.
Yeah, and I just want to speak to the point about the ministry trying to fight this. I think it is really critical to note that a number of public servants took the time and made the effort to put their concerns in writing in the forms of emails that could be OIA'd. There would have been a lot of pressure on them to not put things in writing, to not take notes and to not raise concerns, to simply talk to their manager, because there is a perception, my understanding is it's an inaccurate one, but there is a perception across the public service that conversations can't be OIA'd. Technically they can, technically no one will ever know if you're just saying, no, we never had that conversation. It all gets pretty complicated in terms of how you get information that only exists in people's heads, but that information is still official information. Nevertheless, people at the Ministry of Education went, I'm putting this in writing, and I am writing this so that if someone OIAs this, they will see that I was not on board with this crap. And I salute that, and I encourage it to happen more in the public service.
Yeah, I think like there's that one late April from one of the people in procurement, right, who asks to be taken off this piece of work because they're uncomfortable and they don't think they can justify the appointment of these people on merit, right? And that kind of email, which was long, detailed, and I thought really clear, doesn't come from nowhere, right? That's not, oh, wake up in the morning, spur of the moment thing. That's been bubbling away in someone's head for a while. And the fact, like exactly what you say, Stephanie, that they've taken the time with an awareness that at some point it probably will be come out, I think is really telling.
So we get to this point where the minister has kind of signed off on this report, and we've got the advisory group kind of putting together its own people to be writing the curriculum, which is just ludicrous as well. And you see some of that in the emails that have been released, was with Elizabeth Rata saying, you know, we've been doing long days and we've written all the English curriculum up to year 10, and we're thinking of going up and doing 11 to 13 as well, which was even further out of scope than the writing of the curriculum in the first place. How does that even happen? I
don't know. Like, that's the thing that amuses me. I mean, this is a genuine power play, right? At some point, that group have been able to dictate to the ministry how things are going to be.
And this is before, like, they've clearly been writing the curriculum before it's been approved for them to do it, or that procurement has even happened.
Oh, yeah, I think they'd been writing the curriculum in January and February, which is why Michael Johnston had emailed the ministry asking, do we have to go through a procurement process? It's really clear in Anya's response that they have been writing things already, you know. And then in May, when Elizabeth asks for more time, saying they're a well-oiled machine, but even they can't write more than one program a day. And, you know, as a teacher and, you know, somebody who knows a bit about education, I'm wondering about the conflation of that word curriculum with program, but, you know, we'll put that to one side for a bit. But then you look at the list, and in the 20 days of May, they've managed to write 24 programs, some of which include up to year 13. And you think, well, there's not enough days in May for you to even do the thing if you worked every single day in May. So where have these 24 programs come from? When did you start? You know, clearly before you had one of the lovely phrases I've written in the email, it's like, we do not yet have the authorizing environment to be giving people contracts. So please stop.
And we do need to note that this is not unprecedented in this government. I mean, that's the whole issue with Casey Costello suddenly giving Ministry of Health officials documents that she doesn't know where they came from, but they were just on her desk pre-written for her to give to the Ministry of Health. And that's not her saying she endorses them. She just often gives people random bits of paper that she found on her desk and she doesn't know who wrote them. But this is a known strategy of the right, of these right-wing think tanks, particularly in the United States. And obviously they all talk to our horrible little goblins here. They have this stuff ready to go because they know that you get in and you do it quickly, and it doesn't even matter if you don't have the political capital to do it, because I do not believe this government has the political capital to do most of what they've been doing. But they know they're in here, and if they can just hold the line on confidence and supply votes for 3 years, they get 3 years to just annihilate the existing status quo, the existing curriculum reform processes, and then they can put their own stuff in place. And honestly, they're probably betting that the next government, if it is in 2026, and if it is led by Labour, will be happy just to hit the pause button rather than be equally aggressive and equally proactive in coming in with a set of policies and processes and ideas already in the bank. That was, God, I'm going to cite the name of David Shearer, and for that I apologize, but that was the huge joke of his leadership of the Labour Party, was how many things were, oh, we'll review that, oh, we'll have a working group, oh, we'll think about that, oh, we'll have to look at that. Hipkins does the same thing. It's like, you don't know. do not wait until you're in the ministerial office to commission reports into things, because that's a whole other 18 months wasted. You've got to come in and do it quickly. And the fact that Jacinda Ardern didn't do that twice will be one of the greatest blights on her record. But sorry, this is Stephanie getting on her I'm really grumpy at the Labour Party bandwagon. But the point is, this is something they have been planning for a long time, and something that they clearly knew they would get the go-ahead on. And that's another reason I suspect people at the Ministry of Education are annoyed enough, because they can see that this wasn't just a shoddy procurement process, and this wasn't just a weird decision by the minister.
Yeah, I think like speed's the point, right? That's the whole point, because once you pause, that you've hopefully created enough inertia in the system that you've got what you wanted, or at least enough of what you wanted to then move to the next step. And I think also, like, think of all those hundreds of people in the ministry and all the work they've put in, and the total disregard of that work. There's no wonder there's frustration within that, and the great sadness there is that probably a lot of them have been cast aside in the great culling of public service that's going on at the moment as well.
I was about to say, I had multiple friends who worked past tense in the Ministry of Education, doing really, really good work on the new curriculum. And yeah, it's exactly that. People doing really good work, actually trying to do the best for New Zealand kids and schools, and all just being thrown away because this government has a fundamental ideological opposition to good education.
Oh, and to good process. And, this is one of those things that we're seeing across every sector, is the removal of expertise within government organizations, within the public service, to enable these groups with ideological expertise to be hired on as consultants, because, we need to get someone now. But if we got someone that is, and there's people still in house who could sniff out exactly what they're doing, that would also be a problem. So let's get rid of everyone who might be able to stop it, or to ring alarm bells, or at least make their jobs so overloaded that there's not time to. No one can see what is happening because they are busy just keeping the country running. And I think it's not overlooked on this podcast, but it's something that's often overlooked in the wider discourse, is, all these cuts have happened, and it's horrible on an individual level. They're just making people jobless because they can. It's horrible on a statewide country level, because we're losing the expertise, we're losing resilience in the system, but it's for a reason. All of these things, it's strategic. And it's to undermine, devalue, and weaken the public service, so that their ideological mates and their friends in the education business, or the health business, or whichever kind of private entity they're going for at any given time, food procurement for school lunches, can come in and snap up those contracts and start to run out a range of different policy outcomes that go far, far beyond anything that regularly gets talked about during the campaign, or when we're talking politics or policy, or even in critique and analysis from our mainstream political commentators.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in on that ideology point, because I think that's the other thing that really gets deliberately avoided in mainstream discourse around this government's actions. It is ideological. They try to co-opt notions like common sense and basic competencies and stuff like that, but it's an ideological challenge to the purpose of education. It's about whether you think education is about bringing up little humans to become fully formed, creative, thinking, autonomous beings, or whether you think it's about teaching them just enough reading and maths to work in a fulfillment warehouse for the rest of their lives. And as I understood it, the previous curriculum was much more about tailoring things to the kids, to the communities, not just saying you have to all read King Lear at year 13. The reason I did not do English in year 13, even though I now have an English degree. And they're tearing all of that up and imposing, and we saw some early kind of drafts of this from Elizabeth Rata, this kind of awful conservative homogenous, you have to read Shakespeare and you have to read Beowulf and you have to read Chaucer. And the reason I am always on a high horse about this is because I studied medieval English at university, and I hate how Shakespeare and Beowulf and Chaucer always get thrown up as these like good, noble historical traditions of our literary legacy, because they're also real fucking filthy. Like, let's talk about and Chaucer and Beowulf if you actually focused on the fun parts and not on this is going to impose some imperialist white conservative values into our kids. That's the ideology of this, is to just reproduce not even the current status quo, but the status quo of the 1950s and all of the bad shit that entailed, and focus education simply on being about, are you going to get a good job? And unfortunately, sorry, she's back on the Labour bandwagon, that's a thing that is common across the entire centre of our politics, is this idea that, you know, the fun parts of education are fine, you know, the creativity, blah, 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 blah. But the real thing is, do you get a job at the end of it? Because that's the only way you can have dignity in life, is through paid work. And that notion is going to be one of the reasons it's going to be so hard to push back against this. And that's one of the reasons they've used branding like teaching the basics brilliantly, because who can argue with that? Who can argue that children should learn the basics? Who can argue that children should be doing an hour of reading, writing, and maths every single day? But what we do not interrogate is that they mean, and then you stop. You teach the basics brilliantly, but you do not teach kids to be creative or autonomous, or to challenge authority in the status quo, or to interrogate the texts they're reading. They're just meant to sit there and go, doot, 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 I read Shakespeare, and not see it as like, to use an example, one of the many English teachers in my family, I was a great disappointment when I didn't become one, used to use Richard III with high school year 13s and run it as so let's look at how Richard III builds alliances in order to co-opt the power structures of his institution to take power. How would you do that if you were trying to stage a coup at this school? Is that the kind of class Elizabeth Rata wants people to be teaching year 13s? I do not think it is. It's
but it makes me think
ideological.
that maybe Michael Johnston might have been in that class, because that sounds familiar. But I think you're right, Stephanie. It is that reductionist and that narrowing of what is possible in the classroom that's really disturbing in terms of the pedagogical approach here, right? It reduces education down to almost this inhuman essence that's very materialist in nature and ignores all the other things that a great classroom can do for kids. It reduces the possibilities of those happening. And I think the great trick that Michael Johnston and his clique have managed to pull off is this, it's almost this caricature, like we stand for the basics and kids knowing things. All the other side want are the fluffy stuff. But that's just not true, right? You know, you can't call curiosity fluffy. You know, curiosity is the source of learning. And the great tragedy for a lot of what they're advocating is it squashes curiosity in kids. And all most teachers want is a balance. You know, there is things that have been amplified in what the Ministerial Advisory Group have done, like structured literacy. You know, they'll put it on steroids and they've kind of rolled it out. There's good things about structured literacy. It works for a good number of kids. It doesn't work for all kids, but it works for a good number of kids. And there's no one's arguing that shouldn't be a tool that schools have available to them. It's that imposition, that mandating, that unbalanced approach that's the real problem here. And it's all done, I think, for a particular reason, which is some of the stuff Stephanie's alluded to.
You want to, I guess this kind of works in this sense as well, to talk about the disjunct between curriculum and program and how, I guess, your concerns around that. Because I think that's something that, you know, you talk about that a little bit in the piece that you wrote, but it might not be something that our audience are familiar with as terminology.
Yeah, well, for me, there's quite a marked difference between the two, right? The curriculum sort of sets the regulatory and strategic direction for schools, right? It provides the scope through which learning can happen, that should provide the space for teachers to take that and tailor it to the kids that are in front of them. Elizabeth Rudd has been really, really loud in saying that teachers should not be curriculum writers. And I agree with her 100%. That's not our job to write the curriculum. But in her mind, the curriculum is what happens in the classroom. It is the program. So I write programs every week, programs of learning for kids, scopes for them to engage in. Elizabeth Rata has gone and done that work for me in her mind. Now all I need to do is turn up and just roll out the program, which is the curriculum in her head. She's brought the two together. And so we've ended up with this highly prescriptive, detailed, the year 0 to 6 curriculum that came out a couple of weeks ago is 62 double-sided pages long. I don't know if there's almost not enough time in the school year to get through those 62 pages of programs, I think, when you combine it with all the other things that schools do and should be doing. So I think it's easy to skirt around those words, but I think they're also an indication of the ideology that's driving it. As soon as you start using program to describe the curriculum, you're describing basically a prescriptive, follow the formula, this is the only thing you can do approach to education. And then if you start telescoping that out a little bit and connecting it to some of the other broader ideological things that are going on, programs are very, very easy to be ripe for commercialization, right? So then you're starting to create a market for the provision of those programs that can be sold back to schools and teachers. And I think we're naive if we don't think about that part of what's going on as well.
And it also goes to another thing, which, I'm just teaching Bevan how to suck eggs here, but it's fundamentally about devaluing the role and professionalism and skills and importance of teachers. If you also look at the charter schools policy, it's fundamentally about devaluing teaching and devaluing and disempowering the teacher unions, because it cannot be said strongly enough that the ACT Party fucking hates the teacher unions. They despise them. They despise them so much that they've made the phrase teacher unions and teacher and union bosses is one that they like to use as well, because they desperately need people to not understand that groups like NZEI and PPTA are not these weird abstract organizations. They are representing teachers who are among the most trusted people in our communities. ACT needs us to not have that trust in teachers and to not have that trust in their unions when their unions say what good education looks like. And having these programs pre-written just sets us up for any number of incredibly plausible dystopian outcomes of, well, who even needs a teacher qualification? The program's there. We can probably get a chat bot to read it out to the children, because again, the point of the education is not to inspire thinking or creativity. It is about to get enough boxes ticked on literacy and numeracy to make the working class useful to the owners of capital.
Yeah, and we've seen some of this in the last week. We've been having discussions with Discord about limited teacher authorities, or limited authority to teach, which is going to be used during the charterization process, and kind of working that into some of the policy documents. And it's very clear that all of this stuff is connected. I think even to lay people, when you put them side by side. And this has been one of my kind of biggest struggles with just this government in general, and the way we're responding to it, but particularly with this issue, is that there are people in media who are on this beat, who actually do have experience with reporting on education. I think I've seen a couple of things from John Gerritsen over at RNZ at the very least, but it's very clear that there's an ideological, do we call it a coup? I think that descriptor works in some respects in terms of how democratic processes are being hijacked to undertake an ideological program that attacks teachers, attacks education, and leads to education privatization. But as you're saying before we started recording, Bevan, just no one seems to be picking this up. And there's very, very clear evidence from this OAA that this is what's happening. These are big scoops. These are big gotchas. These are things that would be clickbait. They tick all the boxes of what reporters and media organizations claim they have to do stories about, because that's where the clicks are and where the advertising money is, as far as getting audience to look at it. But there's been next to nothing. like this is a huge series of stories. Now you can make an argument, probably, and as unconvincing as it might be, that it's a capacity and resource issue as well. Like this stuff is too big. There is too much stuff happening, and that is also true. This government's series of kind of policy shock and awe is immense. It's really hard to keep up with, but that's why we have accountability functions like the Fourth Estate that are meant to be informing like boiling it down and informing the electorate about the key issues. But it's falling to people like yourself, Bevan, to go digging into this stuff and write it. Maybe just briefly, what got you to the point where you're like, I actually just need to do something about this?
I don't know. A character flaw, maybe. I have a tendency to run towards fights, maybe. Not all the time, but big ones. I get a little bit indignant around certain things, and I enjoy writing. And initially it was just for me, just to kind of put the pieces together. What am I seeing? How does this kind of, if you put it in a chronological order and just mapped it out, what does it look like? And then once I'd done that, I just thought, oh, well, I can't not put this out there. That would be foolish. So that's basically why I did it. But also, I've been very aware for a while about where these things could head just from seeing what's happening in places like the United States or Great Britain. And, there's educational dystopia in some of those places. And really, what many parents wouldn't want for their kids is happening. You've got, Stephanie alluded to she talked directly about the deprofessionalization of the teaching profession, which is really, really scary on a number of levels because it is a highly professionalized body of professionals in that sector now, highly trained, highly skilled, highly experienced. And with the incursion of commercial imperatives into the education sector, basically turning them into markets and ed tech in those places, teachers aren't required anymore. I've seen examples of 30 or 40 kids crammed into a room, sitting behind computers with 2 behavior monitors roaming around, making sure they're doing work. That's already happening, and that's probably where we will end up if we don't actually try and do something about where these things are going, because that is what privatization of education looks like. There was something in the news this week where even there's a public school in England that is adopting AI as their learning model with behavior monitors in a classroom. No teacher required.
Yeah, I was going to mention this just to have it on record, and obviously it's a much broader conversation, but this is part of writing a program instead of a curriculum as well, right? If it's incredibly prescriptive, that makes it easier for the really, really garbage AI or whatever you want to call it, because let's be honest, there's not much intelligence there in current models, to just put a punch card in and take students through a series of questions and directives. And as you say, just have behavior monitors there. I mean, may as well just be security guards. This is the future that right-wing ideologues want. Everyone shipped off to their little cubes, taught a very specific subset of education policy doesn't seem to fit anymore, but of rules and things that they need to do to undertake a particular role, and then off to the cubicle farm to do that role, because that's what works best for capital. They don't want people who are going to be thinking outside the box. They want someone who can push the button at the right time when they need to. And they don't see education as important for anything beyond that. It's really disgusting to see what they want to do, but also how easily you can extrapolate out from what we're seeing in the current moment, yet how little pushback there has or seems to be on it publicly. And I always come back to this thing as well, where it's all just, when the right wing talk about this, it really is all just rank projection. They talk about, the left is indoctrinating students, the teachers' unions are just there to indoctrinate students and program them to do certain things. And that's what you see because that's what you want to do, and you feel like they're not programming kids in the way that you'd like them programmed. But the way that normal people think about this stuff is just an entirely different world from how people like the New Zealand Initiative think about this stuff. That is completely, they're worlds apart. There's no overlap.
I just wanted to add to your point about, preparing all of our children for the cubicle farms. I think without wanting to get into the politics of envy, we need to understand that their kids aren't going to the cubicle farms. I think it really bears repeating that the group who have been rewriting the curriculum with Michael Johnston include teachers from Auckland Grammar and St Cuthbert's, and one token person from Manurewa Intermediate. I hope they're proud of themselves. But Christopher Luxon's kids are not going to be going to a school where it's 40 kids in a room staring at screens being fed AI prompts. They're going to go to schools that do the Cambridge exams or International Baccalaureate, or they're going to go to Swiss finishing schools. The upper classes kids are still going to get the creativity, the one-on-one education, the high quality resources, the big fancy trips to Western Europe. I believe Auckland Grammar, I don't know if they still run it, but they certainly used to run the Western Heritage Tour, where you go look at things in the Louvre for a while and think about how great it is to be white, I guess. This is about the majority of kids, working class kids and middle class kids, being fed into the economy so that wealthy people keep making money. And that is why this is fundamentally ideological. And that is why the way we think about education matters. And that is why we have to just fight this shit so hard, because that sets the scene for everything that then happens in a kid's life, the kind of education they get, and whether they are taught to be a critical thinker and a person who looks at the world around them and asks, why are things this way, versus someone who just goes, well, I guess I'm off down mine for the day.
Yeah, I mean, it's really becoming a system designed to crush dreams, right? A great example of that is the NCA co-requisites, which have been rolled out over the last 12 months and are really starting to, the reality of them is starting to bite. So their numeracy and literacy tests, the literacy exam is split in two. So it's 2 exams the students need to sit from year 10. They can sit them as many times as they like, but the kicker with them is if you don't pass those exams, it doesn't matter how well you do in your NCA qualification, you don't get your NCA qualification. Now, there are students at the school that I teach at that are going into, we're having their kick there this week, they start off. Literacy writing is on Tuesday morning, I think it is. They're basically multi-choice, so feeds into that, commercialization aspect, even though they're not yet, but, probably will be at some point. But there's kids heading into that have now sat that exam 3-4 times and haven't passed. There's no clarity around what the marking criteria is. There's no one understands really how kids pass or fail, because it is a pass or fail thing. And there's kids 16-year-olds who had these dreams that now they're just wondering, what's the point? I can't do anything. I'm going to leave school unqualified. I might have my NCA with a number of excellences or merits in it, but it counts for nothing because I haven't passed this one test. That's horrific. And I just hope that the reality of that starts to hit a few parents, because I know that there are some parents, particularly in some of the more wealthy schools, who are kind of shaking their heads now going, what? You mean my child can leave school without anything, no matter how well they do, because they didn't pass this? Hopefully that starts to get people seeing things, but I don't know if it will, particularly if we don't have the reporters kind of digging into it. Like, I sent my thing that I wrote about the Ministerial Advisory Group to John Gerritsen, and he replied with, oh yeah, interesting. And that was it.
And as I said, he's basically the only person writing about it at all. And that's what you're getting back is just shocking. What, I guess we'll try and end on a positive note. But in the industry or in kind of the wider electorate, society, whatever, what can people actually do to push back on this? Like, how are we going to get a foothold on this to get the message out?
I don't know.
Oh, I tried.
I don't know. I mean, there's all the cliches, right? Talk to people that you know, all that kind of stuff. I'm on my daughter's board of trustees, and maybe some of there's things that we can do because we're a public school that you can't do if you're a charter or a private school. And all those things have to do around being a centre of the community. Like, for example, the local community hall is being earthquake proofed at the moment. So the school is now the emergency hub for the community. Good luck doing that if you're a charter or a private school, And so maybe building awareness, and the media's got to do some of this, right? Because one of the threats is if a school doesn't perform, Eric Stanford can make them a charter school. Well, as soon as you're a charter school, all that stuff is no longer available to your community. And I think most people would be shocked by that. So there's got to be some kind of way to build awareness around the wider implications just beyond, oh yeah, isn't it great that my child can read when they couldn't before? Which, by the way, is a load of bullshit anyway. So yeah, I don't know what the answer is here, right? There's got to be some media accountability in this. A bit more grit in the way that they go about their job.
Yeah, this is one of those things, right? There are like 10 points we've hit on today that if you told the average voter to use those terms, they'd be shocked. That's absolutely not what I want, and that's not what I voted for. Even national voters, potentially even ACT voters, who kind of ate these promises of like, oh yeah, I want kids to do well. If they're told the reality of what is occurring, they would be deeply concerned for the well-being of, if not just their own child, then the future of children in Aotearoa. It feels like there are so many different hooks for how to approach this, but as you say, without someone in an established institution, whether that's media, whether that's political, whether that's a series of NGOs, hammering this into the public kind of sphere consistently, it just doesn't feel like it's getting through. It feels like it feels like people are starting to kind of get their feet under them and the cogs are beginning to turn, but it's not keeping up. And that's the thing that worries me most of all, I think.
I would say that one thing people can do, and this is just with my comms hat on, is if you have stories about dodgy, crappy, unsatisfying things happening in your schools as a result of these decisions, or if you're concerned about what it means for your local school, then give your story to the relevant union, whether that's NZEI or PPTA, or pick a favorite opposition party, pick a favorite opposition party education spokesperson, whether that's Labour, Greens or Te Pāti Māori, and give them the story, because journos do love anecdotes. They do love this ordinary mum from central Auckland suddenly realised that everything was terrible. They love that. And it's a lot easier to copy and paste than complicated OIAs. So there are ways to get those individual stories up that builds a narrative, which again just feels a little ineffective and not the kind of drastic action we need. But also, if you're involved in one of those opposition political parties, make sure you push them to be stronger and louder and way more aggressive on these issues, not just, and yes, this is mostly directed at Labour, not just saying, oh yeah, we'd stop this, but go out there and say why education is important and why public education is a public good and should be run like one for our kids and not for David Seymour's donors.
Yeah, when I met with NZDI on Monday, they're very keen to start bringing people together that can tell that story. They realise probably they've been caught a bit flat-footed and been a little bit ineffectual, I would say, in the past. And so one of the things that they want to start doing is starting to build that alternative vision of what education is and bringing those stories to the fore. So yeah, definitely what Stephanie says there, if you've got a story, get in touch with NZEI because they want to hear it as part of it. And they're thinking about how they can organise things to start pushing those stories out to the wider public as well. I mean, because what's happening is, to use the word of Sanjana, the disinformation project, like, I thought I was a bit nuts when I first put this together in the first draft, and I was thinking, okay, don't become one of those crazy people, Bevan. Are you seeing things that aren't here? You just kind of, a little bit on your high horse and, just calm down a little bit. And so being familiar with his work, I'll just flick it through to him and just see what he thinks. And so he read a draft and his reply was, this is extraordinary. You're not crazy. And one of the points he made was, this needs to be in mainstream media.
Yeah.
This story needs to be out there. And so, yeah, I'm not sure how to get it out there. I don't know. I do know the Greens have got it. I sent it to Lawrence, the education spokesperson of the Greens, and I got a reply saying thank you, but I've had nothing back since then. So I'm not sure if they're sitting on it waiting, or whether it's too big for them or whatever, right? But again, I'm starting to think, well, maybe you guys need to do a bit better as well with this.
Absolutely. And if people want to reach out to you, Bevan, where can they find you?
So I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on nowhere else. And they can go to my website, which is bevanholloway.com, and there's a contact form there just to fill in if they want to have something a little bit more personal in terms of a conversation. I'll reply to everybody.
Hey, thank you so much for joining us, Bevan. It's been really worrying.
Yay, a positive note to end on.
Yeah, landed that well.
We tried.
We're a step up from nightmare.
Yeah, I mean, this
Yeah.
is the thing, right? Like, part of our role is just to have discourse about this and start that narrative, because the first step in organizing to fight back is understanding what's happening. So really appreciate all the work you've done already in unpicking that, Bevan, and really appreciate you taking the time to come and do that in audio format as well.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being interested. Thank you for giving me some time to talk to you. Really appreciate it. And hopefully it fires a few people up to kind of start working their magic in this space as well.
Fantastic. And thanks to my co-host, Stephanie.
Cheers.
It's been another episode of 1 of 200. As I said, I'll chuck a couple of links in the summary for you to go and read over this stuff. I'll link to Bevan's Blue Sky as well. So you can just easily click through there rather than having to type it out yourself. That's the kind of ease we want to create for our audience. You're welcome. Like, share, subscribe. Let people know that there is independent media out there that is trying to cover this stuff. We have a Patreon link in the summary as well. Give us some money. That would be fantastic, because we do this basically for free. We'll be back in the midweek with maybe 1 or 2 more episodes, depending on how things go. We'll keep trucking along and ensuring that there is a broad left perspective, independent and critical media that exists in this country. Thanks again for listening. We'll catch you then.
If artificers are then I'm living a pointless life, but learning all your lessons. Fucking politics, there's no distinction. The road's upon now. It's paid with good intentions, and I'll admit that I'm at a loss for what to say when they quote this as a cost we ought to stay. 'Cause I live amongst the people every